By May of 2017, I had been personally witness to and subjected to a number of things that I was incredibly alarmed about. Not only had I been kidnapped and subjected to actual physical torture, and not only had I witnessed other people being physically tortured, specifically in connection with manipulation of radio frequency from a cell phone tower and radio tower that was on site at a domestic violence shelter that also had a child care center. And not only had I been exposed to a variety of crimes, including retaliatory crimes for refusing to engage in crime, I was studying non destructive testing, and as I was studying it, I realized that some of the techniques that were being discussed in the courses, in the classes, were actually the kinds of techniques that could be used to effectuate the processes that I was alleging were ongoing. It's one thing when somebody tells you about how they're being targeted by directed energy weapons. Well, how? What's a directed energy weapon? Well, when you start studying these techniques and you start talking about the processes around the industrial inspection of facilities and the kinds of technologies engaged in being able to identify a flaw and or be able to equivocate structural integrity, then you can understand how that kind of technology could also have more malevolent or diabolical purposes. And when you actually start engaging with the actual instrumentation of the inspection, you can see how you personally and your comportment, as well as your environment, can impact the kinds of sensitivity that would go into using those instruments and those technologies, and or may actually potentially exacerbate your actual biophysiological responses to engaging with the elements of the technology. Specifically, I believe, of concern and personally experienced, that addressing factors relating to the use of a radioactive source in terms of what is needed for the proper functioning of the equipment necessary to provide that kind of inspection can actually impact somebody who's performing the inspection or involved in the inspection biophysiologically. Hence, the reason why people that are dealing with active environments where radioactivity is present are required to have certain kinds of testing of their physical responses in order to assure against exposure at a level that has permanent bodily damage, and why necessarily any other considerations involving people who would be involved, especially in that kind of inspection, and or in a sort of industry that would have access to those kinds of materials for exposure, might have to have different labor considerations, different schedules, different compensations, right? And so, on one level, any sort of policy development that could come about in terms of having that access is very important. And then there's other levels. For instance, are people actually being subjected to processes of human test subject experimentation, either in relationship to alleged medical treatment that they wouldn't have needed otherwise, and or other processes up to and including weapons development? Now, I'd watched and I'd attempted to report how by the time I wrote this, 3 times I had seen specific instances where the safety of women and children were subordinated to an ongoing process of competitive bidding on a contract for military equipment. There was, at this time, public notices about how 3 companies, by the time I wrote this, were involved in a competitive bidding for what they called the TX trainer. Now, what exactly this is not, I believe, as relevant as the fact that they were publicly broadcasting that there was an ongoing competitive bidding process for the TX trainer, and they were using places where women and children would go to get access to their most basic resources in an attempt to try to sway their interest in being directed toward what I understand to be some sort of benchmark in the course of demonstrating that whatever they were trying to do would provide the kind of follow through that was expected on whatever this TX trainer project was. That's the nicest way to say it. So I'm going to read it. I've never read it out loud. I submitted this only to the office of Senator Ted Cruz. I did also later send it to people I went to class with. I think by September or October of 2017. But by this time, it had already started showing up in manners that were inappropriate. I was studying with these people. I sent it to them as a prospective piece of legislation. I was hoping that they would talk to each other and they might talk to other people in the sectors in which they worked and consider it legitimately. It was a collegial effort. And I let them know that I had already submitted it to a senator. That was over 3 years ago, just so you know. It's a 2017 excise on drug and human trafficking through the U.S. Human Services Program Act. The purpose of this act is to levy an excise not less than 10% on any entity profiting from the promotion or proliferation of prescription drug usage or trafficking of human beings through the human services system. Insofar as some prescription medications may be necessary for a variety of treatments, this tax should be included as the manufacturer's and provider's cost and any pricing for the provision of product or service related to the administration of products should factor into the excise when considering cost. This is a different one, huh? No, it's not. I'm sorry. Okay, Section 1. All members of Congress, both members of the U.S. House of Representatives and members of the U.S. Senate, shall be levied an excise on any campaign donation received from a pharmaceutical company or medical insurance company providing prescription medication coverage of no less than 10% of total donation at time of donation. Section 2. Any nonprofit, for-profit, corporate, insurance, consulting, or other data acquisition company using any patient data related to any treatment of an ailment requiring the provision of prescription medication or using data related to the prescription or provision of any prescription medication administered to client for treatment as covered under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 2013 for any healthcare operations, research, marketing, or other business-related purpose shall be levied an excise of no less than 10% on the profit or receipt of income related to the use of that patient data. Section 3. Any nonprofit, religious, social, or medical or other organization that surpasses a 2/3 percentage threshold of points used in evaluation of client need in the this is not why is this coming up under Did you swap out what was supposed to be a piece of legislation in order to prevent against misuse of non-destructive testing technologies and financial experimentation on people for a fucking prescription drug tax?